Chargers Unleashed. Jake Hefner and Dan Wolkenstein here with you from the LAFB Network. If this is your first time tuning into the show, make sure to hit that like and subscribe button on YouTube. You can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. Dan Wolkenstein, we are now 7 days away from the NFL Draft. 1 week remaining. The drama, the buzz is palpable as it relates to the Los Angeles Chargers and what they're going to do at 5. And of course, if that wasn't good enough, Joe Hortiz today decided to take the stand for his final press conference before the NFL Draft. And if you've been paying attention, obviously, if you've been excited since Jim Harbaugh became the Chargers head coach and been excited since Joe Hortiz took the general manager position, there were a lot of nuggets that Joe Hortiz decided to drop today as it relates to how they're coming into this draft, how they're perceiving it, as it relates to trades, BPA, a lot of different things that should open your eyes, open some eyes, raise some eyebrows, and definitely elevate some excitement. So we're going to dive into all of that. Before we do, Dan Wolkenstein returns from vacation from the land of the rising sun. He was kind enough to join us in a completely different time zone for our live show last week. But Dan Wolkenstein, how does it feel to have your boots back on the ground in California?
Feels good. R&R was exciting around Tokyo, Okinawa. I was gone for a little over a week. So much fun. Perspective's a heck of a thing. It was gorgeous there, by the way. The time change definitely messes with you. If you add on top of that the flights and layovers and everything that comes with travel. But the experience there was incredible. Such a clean city. Everyone's so polite, so kind, so put together. And the food. Holy smokes. A couple times I woke up the next morning with a deeper voice because of things had the night prior. But that's what happens on vacation. That's what's exciting. And now we come back. Joe Hortiz lays hammers. JK Dobbins signs. Chargers are just one bare naked lady away from the NFL draft commencing. Come on, Jake. You knew it was coming.
I always keep forgetting that. You've dropped that little nugget for the past 4 years that we've been doing this show, and I was not ready for that today.
Yes, and I'm here for all of it because the Chargers are 1 week away from adding some players, 1, maybe 2, depending on how they trade, if they trade. Lots of things happening today for the press conference, though, and some eyes open wide with topics and comments from one Joe Hortiz. But, Jake, before we get to that, I'm so glad to be home, so glad to be doing this again with you, back on the same time zone, makes things so much easier. Before we get to all the fun stuff, let's talk about our friends.
The quickest way to get into all of the sports action that's out there is going over to Underdog Fantasy and their Pick'em game. Just pick between 2 and 5 players of your favorite or least favorite players that you can make a lineup out of and win up to 20 times your money. Just go on over to Underdog Fantasy and use the promo code Unleashed to get up to $500 off your initial first deposit. That's, again, Underdog Fantasy. Let them know that Chargers Unleashed sent you.
So, Mr. Jake Hefner, one Joe Hortiz, comes to the podium today. And this is like minutes after we hear news that the Chargers sign, shocker, another Baltimore Raven legend, JK Dobbins, to add to their running back room. Jake, what did you make of JK Dobbins?
I mean, the pipeline from Baltimore to Los Angeles has been plentiful as it can be since the offseason started. Obviously with Joe Hortiz, with Greg Roman, with Gus Edwards, Bradley Bozeman. Now you add JK Dobbins to this mix. I love this low key signing, Dan, and we were even talking about it during the live show. You know, with so little time before the draft, we didn't think that there was, we didn't think that there was going to end up being a signing. I was actually a little bit surprised when I saw that they ended up bringing him in and signing him to a 1-year deal. I don't think that this changes, and he even mentioned this during his press conference to Joe Hortiz. I don't think that this changes their strategy whatsoever, but I think it definitely solidifies that you probably are going to target a running back on day 3 with the other priorities that you have on your roster that are going to be higher, of course. But JK Dobbins, let's not forget, this is a former second-round pick, still only 25 years of age. And when he came in, he had a great rookie season under Greg Roman. Ran for 805 yards, had 9 touchdowns that year, and unfortunately has just been plagued by injuries over the past 2. He tore his ACL, then now coming in off the Achilles injuries that he suffered in week 1 of last year. But Dan, this is a great pairing because I still believe that Greg Roman is going to have a running back by committee type of approach. And now to have it with 2 guys that he is very familiar with in Gus Edwards and JK Dobbins. And however Isaiah Spiller and Elijah Dotson are going to work themselves into this mix, it'll be very interesting to see. But I think now, when you look at the skill sets between Gus Edwards and J.K. Dobbins, again, this is great news for the Chargers because we've talked about so much as it relates to the running back class for this NFL draft that it's basically a pick your flavor. There is no consensus number 1 running back that everybody sees to say, okay, yeah, that's the guy. Everybody's all over the board on who they believe the number 1 guy is. But as it relates to guys that you can pick up in late day 3, early day 4, if you're looking at the Ray Davises, the Isaiah Davises, the Isaac
Grendo.
Thank you. Don't know why I was fumbling that name. But this gives the Chargers just a lot more room to find a very diverse skill set that's going to end up matching what they want out of this running back stable. And I think it's a great thing for them in terms of how they can solidify it.
Yeah, I mean, on face, right? J.K. Dobbins, you added the running back to the committee, right? Gus Edwards, I think, is a bell cow. J.K. Dobbins, probably RB2, and definitely RB2 at this point. You got Isaiah Spiller there as well. Not sure what that's going to be. And let's not get it twisted. When healthy, J.K. Dobbins is a bona fide baller. Like 6 yards per carry average his rookie year, 5.7 the year after that. Total in his career, 5.8 yards per carry. The guy got 9 touchdowns. You mentioned it. He had that 72-yarder that he had in 2020. The issue is, and again, this is kind of shades of the last however many years, is the asterisk. When healthy, J.K. Dobbins is awesome. But that asterisk has bit this Chargers team in the asterisk for how many years now? So, like, I love it,
well
right?
Put.
Like, I'm not necessarily sure if it moves. I don't think it moves the needle at all with what they do in the draft, what they should do in the draft. I mean, yes, it's a low-key buy low. Maybe you get a bunch of production out of it. Maybe this is the year that J.K. Dobbins can stay healthy. Joe Hortiz said today that a lot of the stuff happened previously with injuries was just luck. But it's hard to put my stock in J.K. Dobbins being the savior because, again, the asterisk. And so that's what makes this a little more tempering my expectations a bit. I don't love it. I don't hate it. I don't think it's a bad signing at all. I'm pretty sure it's very low risk. And they're probably going to be adding to that room regardless, especially given how this team is going to be operating and how the roster is going to be constructed and heavy on the running game, tight end, offensive line. If J.K. Dobbins can stay healthy, again, if J.K. Dobbins can stay healthy, the dude's good. The dude's probably pushing for RB1. We'll see. We'll see. I hope you saw videos on social media a couple months ago that he's looking pretty darn good. You know, Ben Herbert effect with him. Hope that's real. Get him on this team with this staff and this, you know, new beginning for this era. Like, cool. I love it. I just, like I said before, I don't think it moves the needle for me one way or the other.
No. I think the strategy remains the same. I think even before this signing, I would believe that they would have been targeting a running back on day 3 regardless to round out that group. To me, I just think that this solidifies it. And like you mentioned, it's low risk, possibly high reward if that health holds up. And it's still only for 1 year, so you really don't know what the future is going to hold in that regard, but you need to back up your bets in this scenario. So definitely would still expect the Chargers to target a running back on day 3 and address some of their other bigger needs that they have on days 1 and 2.
Yeah, and last thing I'll put on there, go back to college. He absolutely torched Jim Harbaugh when he was at Ohio State. And so I think that grudge may have been held. Checks have been cashed since.
You know, interesting that you bring that up because now, you know, you start looking at this roster a little bit because you have J.K. Dobbins, as you mentioned. It's like, oh, okay. So Harbaugh picks a guy who,
from Ohio
went up
State.
against them and did very well. Ironically enough, 2 years ago, when TCU was on their way to a national championship game, Quentin Johnston had a really good game against Michigan in the playoffs against them. And now
there's some guy
there's
who's
some
the receiver
dude over there in Ohio State that Jim Harbaugh and Jesse Minter love to talk about when it comes to defending said receiver.
So we'll see.
Tell.
So let's perfect segue. Joe Hortiz, Jake, today was in his bag and was doing full posture, which I expect nothing less. But if we're being honest, we haven't seen much of this from Chargers land in the past decade or so. Peppered with questions related to the NFL draft, what selections he might want to take, what trade value looks like, what positions are maybe deep or not deep this year, the progression on college football in general, and how he sees this personally for him as his first year as GM. I think the biggest headline here is when asked about trading out of 5 and what that will take. And he says, you hear a lot about teams, trading, and it kind of becomes a wash of, who won the deal, who lost the deal. It's a wash. And Joe Hortiz just says, no, that's not it this year. And I am not looking for a fair trade. Mic drop. And everyone was kind of like, oh,
chest.
Oh. And he says he anticipates this Chargers team having the number 1 pick because the first 4 are going to be quarterbacks. And he's going to see the value as such. While he anticipates him having the first overall pick, non-quarterback, he has contingency plans if only 3 go or if only 2 go. But he ain't looking for fair trade. He is looking for a haul. He is looking for a team who's going to give up the farm and the crops in order for him to get off of this pick.
He's not looking for fair. He's looking for fleece.
So as covering this team, you're like, look, you're either going to get a bona fide blue chip, because the other part that he said countless times today was we are going to pick the best player available. He said that he's on board with that. He said that Jim Harbaugh is on board with that. He said that's what he did for 20 years back in Baltimore, gave exact specific instances where they had positions already on the roster and went ahead and drafted them anyways because they were BPA, i.e. Kyle Hamilton. If they're drafting best player available, Jim Harbaugh's on board with that. And the only way they're going to trade out of that is if they're going to get a haul, an unfair trade on their end. What does that tell you?
You try not to be over presumptive with things like this.
Uh-huh.
And even, you look at previous Chargers regime, and just in if we were talking about a press conference at this point in time, right before the draft, there would just be like no info being given one way or the other in terms of what was going to be done. And nor am I saying that Joe Hortiz is doing the exact same thing here. But with the Chargers selecting 5th overall, and like he said, kind of calling his shot for what he believes is going to happen in terms of 4 quarterbacks going in the first 4 picks, and basically saying the Chargers in that scenario really have the first pick of the draft, and you line that up with BPA, that road leads only to one specific player in mind. Now,
or two.
I was just going to say that because the board that majority
or 3.
of us have,
honestly, there's probably 3. If we're being realistic, there's probably 3 players that can be there at 5.
Let's be reminded, the board that everybody has in their head is not identical to what the Chargers have in their draft room. Just keep that in mind. Whatever your big board is, it's definitely different than what the Chargers have. So
most likely it's different.
But Dan, I had an ear-to-ear grin listening to this, just from the standpoint of yes to the BPA, because I think that's how the Chargers should definitely attack this, especially when we're talking where they're selecting in the first round at 5th overall. But also, Joe Hortiz talking about being open to trades, and he had also mentioned that he had already gotten some calls with people that were interested in trading up to 5 already. To me, it shows me that yes, he's being open, but he's also going to be aggressive with it as well. I mean, I think especially with 5, it's like, look, how bad do you want this? And for all the potential trade scenarios that we've seen, most likely with Minnesota going up from 11 to 5 and what that would cost. A lot of people have said it'd be 11, 23 and a third round pick next year. I don't think that you hear Joe Hortiz talking. I don't think that would be enough for him because of it possibly being a quarterback tax that another team would have to pay. So of course you're going to say, okay, hey, who's got the best offer? Who wants to come up and get it? Or how much are you going to give me to possibly move off of the best wide receiver in this class? So I love the approach that he is going with. He's being open and also being aggressive at the same time in terms of either taking deals or, push him to the side. But Joe Hortiz flexed his muscles today in that regard in terms of his draft strategy.
Yeah, he ain't messing around. He understands the value of this pick, number 5 overall. Also understands the type of player that he or some other team could draft at that pick, whether that is the 4th quarterback or whether that is arguably the best player in the entire draft of either Marvin Harrison Jr. is probably the big one, but some people have Malik Neighbors. You could say Roma Dunze is up there too. All 3 of those guys, premium. People are talking Joe Alt is the best tackle that's been there in the last decade. I'd argue best left tackle, but that's for a different conversation. Talk about the haul that may or may not be worth it. Jake, question for you though. I saw something on X today. Apparently, Tony Pauline, NFL insider, says that Sean Payton is ready to give up a king's ransom for a top quarterback prospect. He says any package to move up will include at least one future first-round draft pick, Patrick Surtain, and the 12th selection in this year's draft. So, Jake, I ask you, is that enough?
There's
12 next year's
no
first
way.
And Patrick Surtain. Let's just sit that. Let's say that's the reality. Denver calls.
I get it.
Are you saying yes?
Honestly, no. And this is why I'm saying it. Because first of all, I can't see a situation. I know interdivision trades are rare, but in this particular situation, if we were talking about a quarterback that you would essentially be giving your division rival, and then from the Broncos standpoint to say, oh yeah, by the way, we're also going to send our best defensive back to our divisional rival. I just can't see that scenario playing out. So if I don't knock this rumor, but if this ends up playing out with the Broncos, I don't see the Chargers as being a realistic trade partner in this circumstance, because the Chargers would not want to give their interdivisional rival a chance to get a quarterback, nor would the Broncos want to give up one of their best defensive players to their divisional rival.
Yeah, that's probably more of a likely scenario to go to like 4 than it is to 5 or to 3 even. And I also just can't see Jim Harbaugh enabling a trade of that quarterback
right
in their division, being JJ McCarthy.
Yeah.
This is the first time Joe Hortiz is calling the shots as general manager. And he was kind of asked about the pressure of it this year. And he kind of said, essentially, and I'm paraphrasing here, the team has put in so much preparation and hard work and has every scenario kind of like laid out and ready to go, to where he doesn't necessarily think there's going to be pressure, more so than just kind of like the excitement and anxiety behind it being the first time, right? Realistically, like, this isn't the same. This isn't new for him. He's done this for so long. And I think that's why Chargers fans are so excited. That's why Jim Harbaugh selected the guy. I have like no concern really of the trust in Joe Hortiz and staff. And so just to kind of hear him acknowledge, like, you know, the anxiety and excitement, the build up getting into the draft is something, but the actual pressure to succeed, there's pressure every year. Like that's comes with the territory. It's more about just doing your job and being prepared for it. And it sounds like he and staff are.
I want to back that up, because he also had talked about, you know, the in terms of player selection that it would be a collaborative process, but then he also said, I'm going to be the one that's going to make the selection.
It's him. Yeah.
Do you still have better confidence in that? And the only reason that I say this is because from what we know from the previous regime and how that operated was a little bit misguided in terms of player selection, what it was narrowed down to. In this circumstance with Joe Hortiz, Jim Harbaugh collaboration, this seems to be a much more well-oiled machine in terms of their decision making.
Yeah. I mean, this sounds, I mean, I'm pretty sure every organization has a quote unquote collaborative approach. Like, I think everyone has that. I think it's an aligned approach that is the more important part. Everyone is aligned towards the same vision, towards the same type of players, understands what the coaching staff is wanting, understands where and when and how to get those guys. That's the part of the collaboration that I find more important. And so the fact that they brought in half the staff from Michigan, they're all aligned. Half the staff from staff and players from Baltimore, they're aligned. Harbaugh's brother was with him for 20 years. Like, yeah, that's why I think a lot of people are so excited and so bullish about this now new and improved organization, is because the alignment, but also like the synergy of brain trust. Like, that's a big deal. So I don't think that should be understated. I don't think that that goes unnoticed by most, or it shouldn't anyways. But what probably is not common for Chargers fans to hear and to see, if we're being honest, is a general manager who is so insistent on best player available. And to me, that is what's probably most comforting, is knowing that for the most part, I'm sure there are some exceptions here, but this staff, every round, whether it's 5, 37, 7th round, whatever, they're going to select the best player, because rosters change quickly and you can never have enough talent or enough talent at the same position, because you and I talked about before, Jake. Like, let's say they don't go receiver now, or they do go receiver now, and then Josh Palmer's out the door next year. You're going to need another one. Or let's say one goes down, you're going to need two. Like, that's how rosters are built to withstand injury, is to have depth. And right now they've got 9 selections. They're probably going to have more. Best player available allows your team to be built the right way. And that's how teams hit in later rounds, because they're not chasing need, they're chasing talent.
Yeah, I agree. And again, this is just where the Chargers are drafting. And again, now you know who's holding the cards in terms of roster construction and experience and moving around the draft board, something that the previous regime did not have. The opportunity for fireworks and excitement is just that much more.
Yeah. Joe Hortiz was asked about like the depth at certain positions,
yes,
and like when ones should be taken. And he kind of notes, he says that the offensive tackle position group this year is really deep. He says the wide receiver position group is really deep this year. But the part that was interesting to me, I thought, was when he was talking about receiver group, he was kind of talking about, because of the way football has changed and it's become so prolific in passing, you're seeing like 7-on-7 drills in college. These receivers are becoming so much more polished coming out into NFL, that he doesn't really see any year where the receiver position isn't deep. And so I know, and we're sometimes guilty of this too, and fans probably are too, but like, you get so sucked into this year and this class and these players, and this year's wide receivers are so good and so deep. There's always, and this is what Joe Hortiz said, there's always going to be wide receiver talent. Wide receiver talent is deep every year. Does that change anything for you in terms of like, well, if that's the case, then maybe they don't go receiver this year?
It definitely got me curious. I thought that could mean, okay, so from everything that he was saying as far as BPA, does that mean that they're not going to go wide receiver at 5? Or the Chargers currently have 2 big holes as it relates to the wide receiver room as it currently stands right now. Does that mean the opportunity to double dip at wide receiver as has been
I
played
hope.
out there. Does that mean where he was leading in that circumstance that's where they're going to prioritize it?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think it could be either way. I think obviously this team needs a receiver. They've acknowledged as much. They know it's not done. I think this is probably also him kind of saying a lot without saying anything. You know, the wide receivers, yeah, these receivers are good, but they're deep every year. The offensive line's deep, but he's deep every year. Go back and look at some of his videos at Baltimore. Like he says the same thing. You know, he was asked about like, does he prioritize wide receiver? And he's like, of course I prioritize wide receiver. That's a really important position in the game. And but I also prioritize tight ends and running backs and offensive line and defensive line and the edge. So like again, like this is also 1 week ahead of the draft, so he also understands the assignment in terms of not showing any cards. And I know Tom Telesco in the past got in trouble sometimes for not in trouble, but fans didn't like the fact that like he wouldn't say anything. And there's a reason for that. Like you want to protect your cards, but you also, I think, are now in a position with the number 5 overall pick in this staff where you can be a little bullish. And look, we've heard this staff at length talk about how they feel this number 5 overall pick matters, not just to them, but any team looking to get a player at number 5. So, yeah, I mean, if I'm Joe Hortiz, I would do the same thing. If I don't get an absolute haul, I say screw it. I'll stay at 5,
Take a
pick the BPA, try again at 37, or maybe you move up, whatever. But I'm not desperate to get off of 5. Like, it'd be nice if things add up, but like, no, I'm not just going to do it just for the sake of doing it. Like, if someone just says, oh, I'll give you 11.23, like, no, no, I'm not doing it. Anything else from Joe Hortiz today, other than the fact that Joe Hortiz and folks are living together?
It's just, again, that to me kind of gave me a little bit of it was a different type of vibe, because I know he was saying, it's like, oh yeah, you know, my house is big enough that bring everybody down here until their families get down here. It's just like, again, here we go with just the collaborative type of measures, like whatever it takes to try to get this done. I just love this mindset. Dan, you had mentioned just some of the positional breakdowns. He had talked about linebacker, he had talked about corner, he had talked about interior defensive line, especially, you know, which hasn't been talked about enough as it relates to this Chargers team and the priority that he needed to put on it. I mean, talking about corners as well, he had mentioned, you know, obviously Jasir Taylor's been playing in the slot. Derwin can play in the slot in certain packages. Go back to Joe Hortiz's first press conference. He said, we will never stop prioritizing getting corners on this team. And I have said it. There's no way that this Chargers team, as this roster is currently constructed right now, that they could come out of day 2 without a cornerback. I'd have to believe that either in a trade down scenario to put yourself in the early teens or at 37, that has to be their target. The other one, Dan, is interesting in terms of just I know he had mentioned linebacker, and he was basically saying he didn't believe that there was any linebacker that had a first round grade, which sounds about right. You and I have said, you know, that Peyton Wilson has first round traits, but you're not going to put a first round grade on Peyton Wilson.
I would no.
As
for this team, no.
No. And from what we know, Chargers have met with Edgerrin Cooper, have met with Junior Colson. We even talked about it on the live show last week as far as could the linebacker position, because of what Jesse Minter wants to run in his defense and what he needs his linebackers to do in terms of coverage, that shortens that linebacker class dramatically. So does that mean that the linebacker position is going to be elevated in terms of priority goes?
It could.
Maybe at 37, honestly. Who knows?
I don't know about that, but I know like a lot of times I think people had originally kind of targeted one of those 4th round picks for a running back. And maybe now they don't do running back with that 4th round pick and instead go linebacker. Maybe linebacker was going to be something like in the 5th, 6th. Maybe it moves up because of that. This team needs a linebacker. And this team, at least this defense, historically has predicated itself on great linebackers, both in Baltimore as well as in Michigan. There's a lot of links to, obviously, Junior Colson. Like, he'd be great. And the guy's so versatile. He would clearly fit in Jesse Minter's defense like a glove. It would make sense. Chris Jenkins, same thing. You mentioned interior defensive line. Like, that fit is so seamless. You mentioned corner. Mike Sanders still. According to Jordan Schultz today, there's rumors that he's now inching to become a first-round corner. Which, like, dude, the guy's a talented, like, stud. But first round? Like, go get it, kid. Like, that's awesome. But you see these connections to so many players at positions that this Chargers team prioritizes and they need. But that goes back to kind of the larger picture we've talked about, is this team has so many needs. They can say that for basically every position at this point.
It's going to be interesting. I cannot wait. We're 7 days away from hopefully clearing up a lot of these questions.
Yes. Yeah. So until then, we have a jam-packed week. We have special guests. We have mock drafts coming. We have player rankings by positions. We have collaborations coming up. So it's going to be a whirlwind next week. Wow. I cannot believe 1 week. One bare naked lady away.
And if you guys have not seen it yet, reminder, our draft jersey giveaway is still going on. April 25th, we will be announcing the winner for that. Just make sure that you go over to the Chargers Twitter handle, Chargers Unleashed Twitter handle, and follow the rules to qualify for that. So you still have 1 week left to enter that giveaway. So very excited to be giving that back to you guys. Dan, this week's going to be insane. It's going to be insane. And I've told you for months now, when you get this close, the days seem longer. And this whole process feels like it's going to drag out even more. But really, there's so much to get to before we get to April 25th. I cannot wait. Let's go.
Me neither. It's going to be fun. Stick around. We got a lot of things coming. For Jake Hefner, you can find him at Jake T. Hefner, myself at Dan W Sports. Jake, I'm so glad to be back doing with you from the mainland, from our mainland, if you will. Until next time, we'll talk to you next on Chargers Unleashed.